A routine traffic stop. A cop convinced he's caught another criminal. A black man pulled from his luxury car without cause. But in the next few minutes, Officer Daniel Carter's entire world is about to flip upside down. Because the man in handcuffs, he's not just anyone. He's the state attorney. And this arrest, it's about to become the biggest mistake of his career. Officer Daniel Carter sat in his patrol car, eyes scanning the quiet, upscale neighborhood. It was a routine night, and like always, he remained watchful for anything that seemed out of place. Over the years, he had built a reputation in the department, efficient, relentless, and always on the lookout for potential crime. But beneath the surface, many knew Daniel had a habit of profiling black men, even if no one said it outright. As he took a sip of his coffee, his gaze locked onto a well-dressed black man walking towards a luxury BMW parked near a restaurant. The man moved with confidence, checking his phone before unlocking the car and getting in. Daniel narrowed his eyes. A black man, alone in a high-end neighborhood, driving an expensive car late at night? Something about it didn't sit right with him. Without a second thought, he turned on his lights and pulled out behind the BMW. Inside the car, Michael Anderson sighed as the red and blue lights filled his rearview mirror. He had been in situations like this before, too many times to count. Being a black man in America meant always being aware, always calculating his next move, even when he had done nothing wrong. He kept his hands visible as he slowed to a stop, exhaling before lowering his window. Daniel approached aggressively, one hand near his holster. His expression was cold, authoritative, and filled with suspicion. "License and registration, now!" he barked, ignoring any pleasantries. Michael moved slowly, retrieving his wallet. His voice remained calm. "Good evening, officer. May I ask why I'm being pulled over?" Daniel scoffed. "You were driving suspiciously. Got a reason to be in this neighborhood?" Michael kept his composure. He had dealt with men like this before, officers who let their prejudices shape their actions. "I had dinner at a restaurant nearby," he said evenly. "Is there a specific traffic violation I committed?" Daniel didn't like the pushback. His jaw tightened as he shot back. "I'll ask the questions. Step out of the vehicle." Michael hesitated. "Officer, with all due respect, unless you have probable cause." That was all Daniel needed to hear. His patience snapped. Without warning, he yanked the car door open and grabbed Michael's arm, pulling him out forcefully. Michael barely had time to react before he was slammed against the hood of his own car. He gritted his teeth, but didn't resist. He knew better. Resisting could mean the difference between life and death in situations like these. A few people nearby stopped to watch. A young black woman pulled out her phone and began recording. "Hey, he didn't do anything. Why are you arresting him?" she shouted. Daniel ignored her, pulling out his handcuffs. "Hands behind your back, now." Michael exhaled sharply but didn't fight back. As the cuffs tightened around his wrists, he spoke with quiet certainty. "You're making a mistake." Daniel smirked, pushing him toward the squad car. "Yeah, we'll see about that at the station." What he didn't know was that this was not just another arrest. This was about to become the biggest mistake of his career. Michael sat in the back of the squad car, his wrists sore from the too tight handcuffs. He had spent years navigating rooms full of powerful men, debating the law with the best legal minds in the country. But right now, none of that mattered. Right now, to Officer Daniel Carter, he was just another black man in handcuffs. Daniel drove with silent confidence, convinced he had just made another solid arrest. To him, the situation was simple. Black man, luxury car, late at night. The details didn't matter. He had seen it too many times before, and in his mind, he had prevented a potential crime before it could happen. He didn't bother questioning whether his instincts were built on prejudice. When they arrived at the station, Daniel pulled Michael out of the car roughly. Michael remained composed, refusing to give Daniel the reaction he wanted. Inside, Daniel led him to the booking desk, handing off paperwork to a desk officer. "Possible grand theft auto," Daniel muttered, ignoring the way Michael's gaze remained steady, almost amused. The moment Lieutenant Rodriguez saw Michael's face, everything changed. His eyes widened in shock, and for the first time that night, real tension filled the room. "Carter, what the hell did you just do?" Rodriguez's voice was low, controlled, but filled with urgency. Daniel frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" Guy was in a high-end car, looked suspicious, refused to comply. Rodriguez didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned to Michael and sighed, rubbing his temples. "Mr. Anderson, I am so sorry about this." Daniel blinked. "Mr. Anderson?" He looked at Michael, still not connecting the dots. Then, like a slow-motion punch to the gut, realization dawned as Rodriguez continued, "This is Michael Anderson, the new state attorney." The room fell into silence. Every officer who had been going about their usual routine suddenly stopped in their tracks. The new state attorney, the highest-ranking prosecutor in the city, and Daniel had just thrown him into handcuffs like a common criminal. Michael watched Daniel's face closely. There it was, the dawning panic, the sudden realization that his career was now dangling over a cliff. Daniel's throat went dry. I didn't." Michael cut him off, his voice calm but firm. "Didn't what? Didn't bother asking who I was? Didn't consider that I might actually belong in that neighborhood? Or didn't think twice before slamming me against my own car?" Rodriguez was already in damage control mode. "Carter, uncuff him, now." With shaking hands, Daniel fumbled for the key and unlocked the cuffs. Michael rolled his shoulders, rubbing his wrists before fixing his suit. The power shift was unmistakable. Just minutes ago, Daniel had treated him like a nobody. Now he was looking at him like a man watching his career crumble before his eyes. Michael turned to Rodriguez. "I assume this department has body cameras?" Rodriguez nodded quickly. "Yes, sir." Michael's eyes flicked to Daniel. "Then I trust there won't be any missing footage." Daniel opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. For the first time in his career, he was completely powerless. Michael stood tall, his gaze locked onto Daniel's as the weight of the moment settled over the room. Officers whispered amongst themselves, tension thick in the air. The man they had just seen in handcuffs wasn't just another citizen, he was the state attorney. The same man responsible for deciding which cases move forward, which officers faced charges, and who walked free. Daniel's pulse pounded in his ears. His entire career had been built on authority, on control. But standing in front of Michael now, he felt that power slipping away. He scrambled for an explanation, some justification for his actions. "Look," Daniel started, his voice forced and defensive. "I was just following procedure. You weren't complying." Michael let out a slow, measured breath, keeping his tone even. "Not complying." He shook his head, taking a step closer. "Tell me, Officer Carter, what exactly was I supposed to comply with? Sitting in my own car, answering your questions politely? Or was my real crime simply being a black man in a nice neighborhood?" Daniel's jaw tightened. He had heard these kinds of accusations before, on the news, in training seminars he barely paid attention to. But this was different. This wasn't some abstract debate. This was real, and it was happening to him. Rodriguez interjected, his voice firm. "Carter, you had no probable cause for that stop, and from what I've seen, this looks like racial profiling." Michael crossed his arms, watching Daniel squirm. "You didn't even ask for my name before deciding I was a criminal. You assumed, and now you're standing here trying to justify it." He let the words settle before continuing. "So tell me, Officer Carter, what do you think happens next?" Daniel swallowed hard. He could feel the stares from every officer in the room, waiting for him to respond. But for the first time in his life, he had nothing to say. The silence was broken by the buzz of a phone. One of the younger officers checked his screen, eyes widening. "Sir, there's already a video of the arrest online." Rodriguez took a sharp breath. "Of course there is." Michael turned slightly, glancing at the screen. The footage was already gaining traction, comments flooding in, people demanding accountability. The public outcry had begun. Rodriguez exhaled, rubbing his temples. "Internal Affairs will be handling this. Carter, turn in your badge and weapon until further notice." Daniel's breath hitched. "Wait, sir, Rodriguez cut him off. "Now." Michael didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply met Daniel's gaze one last time. "The difference between you and me, Officer Carter, is that I actually believe in justice. That's why I'm not pressing charges against you." Daniel blinked in shock, barely able to process the words. "But," Michael continued, "I am recommending that every single officer in this department go through racial bias training, including you." Rodriguez nodded. "Agreed. And trust me, Carter, you're going to need to learn a lot if you want to wear that badge again." Michael adjusted his suit and turned toward the exit. As he walked out of the station, every officer in the room knew one thing for certain. Nothing would ever be the same again. The fallout from the incident was immediate and severe. The video of Daniel's aggressive arrest had already gone viral, sparking outrage across the city. News stations picked up the story, social media exploded with demands for justice, and activists called for Officer Carter's immediate termination. The police department was under intense scrutiny, and Lieutenant Rodriguez had no choice but to suspend Daniel indefinitely while Internal Affairs conducted an investigation. Daniel sat alone in his apartment, staring at the news on his television. His name was being dragged through the mud. Words like racist, abuse of power, and unfit for duty filled the headlines. He had always believed he was a good cop, just doing his job. But now, for the first time, he was being forced to ask himself a question he had avoided for years. Had he been wrong all along? Meanwhile, Michael Anderson stood in front of a sea of reporters, addressing the public in a powerful press conference. He spoke not out of anger, but with a clear, unwavering message. What happened to me is what happens to black men in this country every single day. The difference, I had the power to walk out of that station, most don't, and that is why we need change. His words resonated far beyond the city, reaching audiences nationwide. Despite public pressure, Michael didn't push for Daniel's firing. He wanted something bigger, real reform. His demands were clear: mandatory racial bias training for every officer in the department, stronger accountability measures, and a fundamental shift in the way law enforcement approached policing black communities. The department, facing immense backlash, had no choice but to agree. Days later, Daniel received an unexpected call. Michael wanted to meet. Confused but with little choice, Daniel arrived at the state attorney's office, feeling exposed and out of place. When he stepped inside, Michael was waiting, seated calmly behind his desk. "You could have ended my career," Daniel admitted, his voice quiet. Michael studied him for a long moment before responding. "I didn't need to. You did that yourself." He leaned forward. "But I didn't come here to gloat, Carter. I came here because I believe people can change. The question is, do you?" Daniel hesitated, his pride warring with the undeniable truth. "I don't know." Michael nodded. "That's an honest answer, and it's a start." He slid a pamphlet across the desk. "Police training on racial bias and community relations. You should attend." Daniel stared at the pamphlet, the weight of his actions settling in. He had spent years believing he was protecting people, but maybe he had only been protecting his own ignorance. For the first time, he wasn't just a cop. He was a man forced to confront the truth about himself. And maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to change.